broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right, thank you and welcome to our webinar. We promised to get you out of here in 25 minutes, so we are going to start promptly at 2 o'clock. Thanks to those of you who got on board on time. We'll send the recording to everybody else, so let's get things rolling. I am clicking and it's not moving. I am clicking and it moved. I'm Jim Tobin, founder and president of Carusele. I also founded a company called Ignite Social Media in 2007. I've written 2 books on social media marketing back in 2008 and 2013. And with Carusele, we've run more than 150 influencer marketing programs in just the last couple of years. So we've got a lot of experience in this space and excited to share some of the high-level findings with it from you. Do submit your questions right in the GoToWebinar screen. You should see one marked questions. Submit in there. We are monitoring that. And after the 25 minutes, if you want to stay on, we'll answer as many as we can. As I mentioned, we are recording this and we will provide the recording to everyone who registered. You can also tweet throughout. We're monitoring Twitter. You can mention at Carusele, C-A-R-U-S-E-L-E, or use the hashtag InfluencerWebinar anytime to get our attention. So let's jump right into this. 76% of marketers, that's 3 out of 4, say that the biggest challenge of influencer marketing for 2018 is determining their campaign ROI. We don't think it's that hard to do if you set your campaign right from the beginning, up correctly from the beginning. So what I'm going to do today is run you through these 25. They start with the most simple things that anybody can do. That's the basics on the next slide. And they go to some pretty advanced measurement techniques that only those with big budgets and infrastructure can do. So let's get into the basics as we go. The easiest, most obvious one you can measure is potential impressions, also called max potential. This is the max number of times your brand could get in front of your target audience. It's typically measured by an influencer has 1,000 followers, they share a piece of content, that is 1,000 max potential impressions. Obviously, that's not how many people actually see your content. The real value to this, if there is one, is being able to compare apples to apples from one campaign to another as to the relative potential campaign size. The second one is engagements, or better, a cost per engagement. So how many social interactions did you receive, and likes, comments, shares, those sorts of things. I often like to divide this by the cost so you can get a cost per engagement, because then you can compare that to other places you can get a cost per engagement. It's also very helpful to compare one campaign to another as an efficiency measurement of which one drove the most engagements for the dollars spent. The third, and this is only if you set the channel up to do this, or rather the influencer program up to do this, is to measure the increase in growth of your own followers on your own channels, Facebook, Instagram, and the like. This was all the rage in 2010, 11, and 12. Get me more followers. It's less important, frankly, now than it has been before, with the decline in organic reach and the increase in paid reach. But some programs can be set up to do this. We've run some with sweepstakes where you get an entry for following channels, those sorts of things. So you can set up that for a sort of long-term strategy as well. The fourth one is clicks, or a cost per click. So when you're trying to get people to come to your website, how much did it cost you to get a click on the website? And what was that total cost? How many times did somebody click to learn more? How many times did somebody click to get to your website? This is a very, very valid metric for e-commerce brands or brands trying to drive traffic to the website. We'll have some other e-commerce sort of related metrics, but I think as you use those, a cost per click metric makes a lot of sense as well. And it's also another good way to measure efficiencies between campaigns. The fifth one under the basics is to measure the number of pieces of content that you created. Now, there's a couple different ways to do influencer. I've seen some companies where they take a photo that the brand has produced, they share it with 20, 30, 40, 50 influencers. They have all the influencers share that same photo. That is not a good way to measure pieces of content, because you basically put out one crappy piece of content and have everyone share the same thing. That to me is not influencer marketing. So good influencer marketing is different perspectives of people showing how a piece of a product, how an item has improved their lives or could improve somebody else's lives. If you're doing that sort of campaign, measuring the number of pieces of content that that you're getting from those campaigns, particularly if you have the rights to reuse them, is a valid metric. We're going to talk a little bit more about later in putting a quantitative value on that content as well, because if you make content for a brand for a living, you know that it's relatively difficult. The sixth and last one under the basics is total potential reach. So while potential impressions, if I have those 1,000 followers on Instagram and I share 3 times, the answer in potential impressions is going to be 3,000 max potential impressions. But total potential reach is only going to be 1,000 because the most you could possibly reach is 1,000 followers. So this is a bit of it's a more conservative number certainly than max potential impressions. It's still a bit inflated over what's really going to happen, of course, but it is another way to measure the relative size of a campaign compared to a prior campaign or to a future campaign is your total potential reach. Now, in any of those, in any of these basics, I have to say, watch out that not all influencer companies measure these metrics the same way. I'll give you an example under item 1, potential impressions. Some companies that we run up against are saying, well, not only will we give you the fiction of saying that, you know, they have 1,000 followers, so you're going to reach a max potential of 1,000, which we all know isn't accurate. We're going to give you that fiction, but then if anyone likes it or comments or whatever, then that's going to go to their followers as well. So we're going to measure some way, we're not going to tell you, the viral or second generation impressions likely to generate from that. So I don't think that's a valid way to do it, but a lot of companies are doing it. I think you're going to want to check out how, when somebody tells you I can get you 50 million max potential impressions or 100 max potential impressions, that if you're looking at 2 different companies, for example, they are counting those max potential impressions the same way. I do have a blog post that is linked here. You can find it on our site. It's called the 4 ways to measure influencer marketing impressions. I think as you're taking this to particularly outside companies, knowing what you're in for will help you better compare apples to apples. So those are the basics. These are sort of the most elementary things that any influencer marketing program can do. They're modestly important at best, but they're good in comparing the relative size from one program to another. Now, getting into insights. What can you learn from these programs? Well, number 1, you can get insight from the content. Now, we do this in a formal way here at Carusele. We have something called the Content Performance Index, where we're analyzing every single piece of content. We're looking at its impressions, its engagement, its virality, how many clicks it got. We're even measuring, giving it a hand score on content quality relative to its value to the brand. And then our algorithm stack ranks each piece of content from the very highest to the very lowest, with an average piece of content scoring 100. You can set something like that up for yourself, or you can at least look in and say, okay, these pieces that seem to do the best, they were thematically about our price, or they were thematically about recipes, or they were thematically about the quality of our brand. There may be some things you can learn from the content that does well as to what the brand community, the community exposed to cares about. That can be really interesting. People spend a lot of money at focus groups to get that kind of insight. You can potentially pull it out of your campaigns for influencer marketing as well. One that I haven't seen anyone else do that I think is really important, because one of the things that as influencer marketing gets more well entrenched, people are looking at ambassador programs, so using the same influencers over and over again. To that end, we've created another algorithm we call iStack, but we're basically measuring the performance of each influencer, so not at the content level now, at the influencer level, to measure how all of their content did with reach and quality and those things, but also factoring in cost efficiency. If one influencer costs twice as much as another, they would start out lower on that score because their efficiency wasn't as good. But obviously, if they deliver twice as much reach and engagement and clicks and all those sort of things, they'll move back up the ranking. So are you ranking the score of your influencers in each and every campaign? It helps you learn who to hire at the next campaign. We've used that very effectively for brands like Jared the Galleria, where we pick the best influencers to continue as we go through programs all year round for them. And we find that the cost per engagement drops dramatically over the course of the year by optimizing influencers who are resonating best with the community. The ninth one is an engaged audience. So, particularly as we see more and more conversation around fraud with influencer, fake followers, fake engagements, those sort of things. One of the ways we work around that at Carusele is we create a custom audience out of the people who are engaged with the content, meaning they click any of our links. Obviously, we can do that for you, or you will need a third-party tool with the right kind of links to click in there. But if you do that, you can not only create a custom audience, but you can then get data on what's the makeup of that custom audience. So obviously this client under client B here asked us to target females age 18 to 44 in the United States. We were able to show them that 100% of the clickers were in fact in that demographic. And so this is a really good answer to, but am I just getting some clicks from a click farm in Pakistan, for example? So can you tell your brand or your client or whoever your boss is, yes, look who's engaging with us. Sometimes that's reassuring. Yes, 95% of the clickers were females. That's what we wanted. But did you know that 90% owned a home? We didn't expect that. That's a really positive thing. You can get some insights out of that as well. So moving on, continuing in campaign insights, number 10. This is a good one I highly recommend doing, and this is an increase in online share of voice. If you're familiar with share of voice from television, it compares your share of the total television ad market for jewelry or travel or whatever category you're in against your competitors. So if there's 100 TV commercials, did you have 30 of them? Did you have 5 of them? Did you have 50 of them? So we do online share of voice. How many times is our brand mentioned versus the competitors? And so this is important to do a pre and post campaign. So here's one for I believe this is for Jared, the Galleria. You can see before the campaign, Healdsburg was mentioned 72% of the time using the keywords we chose for this. And then during the campaign, Jared took over and it was 65% of the conversation, while Healdsburg was only 29% of the conversation. So part of what we're doing with influencer marketing is manufacturing online conversations for the same reason we do advertising: positive exposure of a brand in front of people with a propensity to buy. That is eminently measurable with tools like BrandWatch or Tracker or Sysomos or those sorts of things. Content value, if in addition to influencer, you have to manage your social channels and you have to create all that content, it's not easy. So what's the value of the content being produced from this program, particularly if, as you should, you are getting the rights to use that content going forward? You can see here EAS, which is a supplements company, took this photo we had created by one of our influencers and made it their homepage image. So we have here's a sample formula for how you do it. What would you pay to get a blog post written? $1,000? What would you get to get a video written, created? $750? What would you create to get a photo? $250? You can change those numbers to whatever you feel. And then how many blog posts plus how many videos plus how many photos? That's the content value of what was produced during your program. The 12th one is audience attention. So we have another formula here. I mean, really what we're doing in marketing is we're battling for attention, right? And engagements cannot happen on content that wasn't seen. So if I liked it, I shared it, I commented on it, I read a blog post, I obviously saw it, I obviously paid attention to it. So we've created a formula based on some original research we've conducted here. How much time does it take to share? How much time does it take to comment? What's the average reading time of a blog post? And calculate the total minutes of attention that the audience spent consuming our content. So that can be a very compelling metric as well to show, yes, this was spread around across multiple influencers, so it was very hard to see. But when you add up just the people who took actions, we have a nice measurement of time, often thousands or hundreds of thousands of minutes of time spent consuming this content. So now we're going to move away from the audience and campaign insights and start to get into attribution of real sales. Now, first I'm going to do partial attribution and then I'm going to do more complete attribution. I'll explain why these are partial attribution even though some of them seem to be complete attribution. So starting with the first one, promotion code redemptions. This can be coupons in store, it can be promotion codes online. We did this program for ReadyWhip where we generated 250,000 coupon prints and downloads for $1 off at walmart.com. That is something that is eminently very measurable and very important. The reason I call this partial attribution and not total attribution, even though you can count whatever 25,000 of those coupons were ultimately redeemed, or 30,000, or whatever the number is there, and therefore you impacted 25 or 30,000 units sold. But the important thing here is there's a number of people who are going to see this, not bother with the coupon, and take a buying action. Those people are not being measured by this, and therefore it is partial attribution. Moving on to number 14, direct web traffic. So we build some of our campaigns designed to drive traffic directly to the website. So there's a lot of optimization of the content to pushing people directly to the website. Obviously, how many people did we send to the website? In this case, we sent over 18,000 clicks for a baby carrier to Bye Bye Baby, a website we don't control. When we control for the client, when the client rather controls the website, you can also see what is the quality of that web traffic. So did these 18,000 people buy at a higher rate than people sent to that website through other methods, the lower rate, or the same rate? So, if I can tell you for X number of dollars, I will send at least 10,000 people to your website, depending on what business you're in, that can be highly, highly compelling. So direct web traffic, again, direct web traffic. Now, everybody knows who does Facebook or Nielsen or anything else, that there are a percentage of people who will not click directly. They will either go to Google and look up the product, they'll go to Amazon and study the product first, and then come back and type in your website. So again, it's only partial attribution. Number 15 is a lift in online mentions. This is a lot like share of voice, but it doesn't measure relative to your competitors. So when we were launching the Nice brand for Walgreens, it's a house brand for Walgreens, we're able to measure a huge lift in number of times that the brand Nice and the retailer Walgreens were mentioned online. So again, counting that share of voice and that growth in online mentions is ultimately what we're trying to do. Continuing in partial attribution, number 16, branded keyword search lift. Now, this is not a campaign we did. Most of these examples are from campaigns we did, but a really neat campaign that Olay did recently with some influencers, where they were able to measure a 22% jump in searches for their brand organically. That has a lot of value. It goes back to the partial attribution I measured, where some people are just going to Google. That's what they saw for Olay, a nice jump in Google searches. So if you can set up to measure that, it is a very interesting, very good way to measure the impact of an influencer program. Correlated sales lift. So we've done this. Here's an example where we did this for Revlon, where we were marketing mascara at a particular retailer with a particular offer, a buy one, get one, a BOGO offer. They had run this offer at the same retailer on the same product, even on the same day of the week, 3 months earlier. So we had an excellent benchmark period. Then we ran our campaign and we moved 209% more units than they did the last time they ran the same discount offer. That is a very strongly correlated lift in our campaign running and the appearance of these sales. We also did this for Frito-Lay, where we took their tracked sales daily against the holiday period the year prior, and we overlaid the appearance of our content and our impressions and the correlation between our impressions and our sales. Now, correlation, very famously, does not equal causation, but it was very interesting to see the very strong correlation between the appearance of this content and the sales lift as well. So another way to measure if you just have some friends who are good with data and R-squared and things like that. Other correlation analysis, this is a program we did for Haagen-Dazs. We were able to see a 49% restock rate for the ice cream in the markets we were targeting. So what key business metric, if you can't get sales, can you get, and can you move it in time with your program? And as your programs turn on and turn off, does the correlation stay strong? If so, it's a fairly meaningful indicator that you are in fact moving a business objective with your influencer marketing programs, which is the ultimate goal. Moving on to number 19, and we're 19 minutes in, conversion tracking. So if you can set up the appropriate link tracking, we talked about just counting the number of people who go to a website, even better if you can track those who are optimizing. This is really good for e-commerce, and when you can optimize for those who are actually making sales. So what conversions did you get coming directly from these links that are clicked? Again, it's partial attribution because we know some people are going to come in days later, those sorts of things. Facebook is good at getting multi-touch attribution, as is Google Analytics and some others, but tracking those conversions from a campaign is really a very strong way to ask for more budget for your next campaign if in fact you're moving sales as you hope you are. Other correlations, you're not always going to have sales. You're not always going to have a neat UTM coded URL. One good example is when we did for Walgreens, we did a program with their mobile app. We weren't able to track the links over to download their mobile app, but we were able to see a 28% lift in mobile app downloads when our campaign ran, the only news source of marketing entering the market at the time, and then a 33% lift in the number of people who opened the app for the first time, meaning we either got people who were more likely than average to open the app, so better downloaders, or we got some people who had already downloaded the app but had never opened it to go back and open it from our campaign. So this is a very strong business metric, not directly related to sales, but directly related to the goal happening as well. Some companies use affiliate sales to measure their influencer tracking. We do not typically, but it is a good way to do it. If each influencer has an affiliate link and this one drove $10 in sales and the next one drove $1,000 in sales, it's a really nice way to measure the value of influencers, almost like we were doing with our iStack model as well. But being able to count up not only at the influencer level, but at an aggregate campaign level, hey, this campaign drove $20,000 in affiliate sales. That's a very good measure of the effectiveness of your campaign as well. Number 22 is ad recall lift. Facebook offers this for certain ad types. It's a measure that they have estimated of what percentage of people who have seen your ad will remember it 48 hours later. So unpublished anywhere, but I'll give you a little inside tip. We have been told by reliable sources that the average ad recall lift for Facebook is about 6%. So if you're getting a 9% recall, then you're doing about 50% better than average. If you're getting 12%, you're doing twice as well. So obviously, if people recall your ad better than average, then you're doing your job a bit as a marketer, again, under partial attribution. We have 3 minutes left and we have 3 items to get to. A sales lift study is an excellent way to do this. It does take a more significant budget. Look for budgets in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $400,000 to run a program like this, but CPG brand White Wave Foods did this with Silk Almond Milk and Nielsen Catalina, and they studied the test and control, how many sales they did over a 52-week prior period, and then how the exposed group bought more Silk Almond Milk than the unexposed group. In fact, they found that it was $285 of additional milk sales for every 1,000 exposed people. Very, very powerful metric if you can do that as well. If you need the full study, let me know. I will send it to you. I'm Jim at Carusele.com. Again, spelled the weird way of the logo right here. A foot traffic study is a really interesting one if you set up your campaign to have the best content optimized. That's sort of our secret sauce here at Carusele, is we do those sort of things where we're exposing the best content to very specific groups. Well, if you do that, then you can set a test and control, and you can count devices that were exposed to influencer content versus devices that were not. If you set up a really clean test versus control, you can then measure what percentage of those devices ultimately went into a retail location in the 30 days following exposure versus what percentage of the unexposed group went in as well. Now, this also takes a significant amount of dollars to get enough volume to expect to see a measurable lift. But it's very powerful to say we saw an incremental 7% in-store visits from people who saw the content versus people who didn't. Now, potentially the hardest of all, and potentially therefore also the most valuable of all, is media mix modeling. If you're not familiar with this, it is a statistical analysis. It uses multivariate, I think, regression analysis. There's all sorts of big SAT words in there. But what they're basically trying to do is taking all your spend on marketing and creating a very complicated model to say what percentage of our sales is attributable to TV, to search, to social, those sorts of things. If you have media mix modeling, you can definitely add social to it. We've had clients do that and do a really good job with it. Staples is one client who has social in their media mix modeling. You can also add the influencer content in here, provided you have, again, enough scale to put it into the media mix and expect to see results. So These are real studies designed to measure total attribution, sales lift, foot traffic, and media mix modeling. They're the hardest ones to get to, but if you set up your programs properly, they are all very, very doable. And as we mentioned before, those earlier ones, partial attribution and even the basics, can be done by many more people. It is 2:24. We are just under 25 minutes in. At this point, I'm happy to turn the program over to any questions that may have come in, or any questions you want to ask in the little box there. Please do feel free to fire away. If you're done, I promised you'll be out at 2:25. It is 2:25. So with that, we're going to take a quick pause and take a look at some of these questions. So the first one is fake followers has become a major concern. How do you prevent these unethical practices from interfering with your metrics? That is a very good question. I think there's a couple things to think about in regard to fake followers. On the upfront, it's important that you vet your influencers, not just use a database of influencers and pick those with large numbers. You have to, by hand, look at the content they're producing and look at the comments that they are getting in there. So look for one-word comments are often fake, not always. One emoji comments are often fake as well. You can run a number. There's an Instagram one, there's a Twitter one. You can just Google, Twitter fake followers. You can put in any account and get a measure of fake followers for any account. Now, even people who have never purchased followers are likely to have some percentage of fake followers. It's the way that click farms work. They follow the people they're paid to follow, and they also follow others they're not paid to follow to try and throw off the algorithms that sniff them out. So that's part of it. The other thing on the back end is make sure you're not setting up an incentive that you're then suffering from. So some people pay per engagement. That is going to encourage people to go to one of those services where, for 20 bucks, you can buy a bunch of engagement. If I can buy it for $1 and sell it to you for $5, a certain percentage of people are going to do that. So what we look for instead is authentic, organic engagement, and we're hand vetting the influencers, and we're hand scoring the piece of content. So if a piece of content is, there was an article recently about a guy who gave influencers a picture of his butt to share, and a number of them were willing to share it for money. That's not a great piece of content. If nobody is looking at that content to say, obviously this is not a good piece of content, you're going to get these unethical practices continuing. We have dropped influencers who we could see were on their own buying engagement, and we could see in some that the engagement was coming from a foreign country, all the same foreign country, which had nothing to do with our campaign. So those are some of the ways you can sniff those out. Another question is, how much would it cost to invest in an influencer performance study, and which of the three do you think proves the most value? I think this question is related to that slide we were just on right here on sales lift versus foot traffic versus media mix modeling. So foot traffic study is best for retailers if you have retail locations, because all we can tell in a foot traffic study is, did they walk into the store? So if you're Olay, you probably are not going to do a foot traffic study. If you're Sephora, you very well may want to do a foot traffic study. A sales lift study can be done across one retailer or multiple retailers. So that's potentially a more interesting one for CPG brands. But in each case, you're probably looking at $300,000 to $500,000 in scale of the program to make sure it's big enough to measure. It also depends how many retail locations you have. Are they high traffic? Are they, how often? So if you're Walgreens, you get people coming in your store every week. If you're Cadillac, you get people coming in your stores every 4 years. So, or 7 years, or whatever the case may be. So that is, there's a lot of parameters to factor in there. And obviously media mix modeling isn't something you're going to start on your own if your company doesn't already participate in that. So I think for CPG brands or fast moving products, sales lift, and for retailers, particularly high frequency retailers, a foot traffic study might be the way to go. And I see one more question here, so I'm going to answer that last question. If you have any other, this is your last chance to fire away in this box. Otherwise, I'm going to answer this last question and then we'll wrap it up with 30 minutes gone and 30 minutes back in your day. Can you explain the way you measure impressions versus the viral impressions previously mentioned? Yes, at Carusele, we do it a little differently. So we have the organic social shares of the content. We're testing and scoring all of that content. And then we take the highest performing content, that's usually about 15 to 20% of it, and we boost it to very specific target audiences, and we optimize for particular goals, all in one sort of campaign budget. And we often boost from the influencer's own accounts. So not using the handshake tool, using the advanced targeting of business manager and those sorts of things. So we're counting max potential impressions for the organic because it's not great, but it's the apples to apples across campaign and across influencer. And then we measure that, we mix that with true views from the boosted content. So that's 100% certified full impressions. And so our measurement is coming in significantly below max potential, and definitely below max potential plus viral impressions, which I think is a fiction that nobody should tolerate. So I hope that's helpful. I know I talk very quickly. Do feel free to email me. I am jim@carusele.com. I'm also jtobin on Twitter. So feel free to hit me up on either of those. I'm happy to answer any of your questions anytime. But otherwise, it is 2:30. You have 30 minutes back in your day. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and I hope to see you at a future Carusele webinar. That's all we have. All the best.